Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review episode 3 of Invasion. So, this episode honestly is to be kind of like, hey, these guys are doing something, but it's not all that productive. We have an episode where people are just trying to, like, it's kind of like a survival episode where people are just kind of going off from where they were originally to go on a road trip kind of one way or another where people are going to make it to a different location, and that's all it's what's focused on for most of these characters. Or we have Mitsuki, who is to kind of stay where she has been at to investigate what had really happened with her people and to pull up certain footages of what was going on in the spacecraft so they can come up with what really had happened. So that's kind of has been what this episode was. So not really a very productive episode, but an episode nonetheless. Like there has to be some kind of filler episode presented here where they're just kind of stretching things out at some point, because it's like, well, hey, we gave you something really fascinating in the last episode, now we have to kind of pull back and just kind of just have people just like, okay, but what was last episode though, right? What was that last episode? So that's, I think, all I got for this one. Like, it was just very like, you have people just watching the TV, all of the characters at some point were all watching TV with the exclusion of Travante, who can't because he's out in the middle of the desert somewhere. So the only thing that he could really look on is a mirage at some point. That's about it. So, and also the kids, like, they have nothing really to watch on TV either because they don't have a TV, because basically all they're relying on is a campfire and a bus that probably should have exploded once it crashed, but I guess it didn't. And so it seems like these kids are stuck into some little canyon of sorts, or some kind of uh, just cliff that is to be like kind uh, of a cave-in of sorts, where like these people cannot easily, I guess, climb out of this spot. So yeah, so I think that's all that I have really. That's all I got. That's all I can say cryptically, because there isn't much spoiler wise either. So let's get into it. Let's go and cover. I guess I'm gonna go through as per usual and just kind of pick and choose certain characters and just tell their story. So again, probably out of all the stories, probably Anisha and her family probably has the most to do in this one. So I think I'll just go on and cover certain bits and pieces, and then head to that story towards the end. So let's go with Trevante. So one thing that I had forgotten, or one thing that I had forgotten, was to say that it's going to be spoiler time here. So let's go to that double five, because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you get spoiled this episode. So the one thing that I forgot to mention was, of course, all the army guys going off and singing Moana while they were to make it to their mission in the last episode. I completely spaced out about that because I was like, should I mention that? Is it a real relevant thing for me to mention them singing Moana? And weirdly, so I'll throw that in here now. So Trevante is to go on, and I guess we had this explosion that had gone off with all these soldiers, and like this kind of boom boom as a Afghan refugee is to eventually say, because Trevante is to go to his equipment in one of his army vehicles and try to call out for help, and nobody's responding. And so it seems that Travante is to have a wound on his shoulder that he is trying to just slap some like basically the equivalent of toilet paper on a wound that's possibly bleeding out. So Travante goes and kind of bandages his wound as best as possible and starts to just continue to head out into the desert. And so Travante is to fall over and pass out, probably from dehydration, because of all the equipment that he is wielding. Not only that, but like I'm sure with the just him just bleeding out also is also going to possibly accelerate things. So Travante falls into the desert, so he is to, I guess, have what is to be a mirage, to see a woman that he had talked to before in this whole video call, is to be walking through the desert. And so Travante is just be looking and like, oh my god, like that's his girl, I guess. So all of a sudden, we have an Afghan man who is to go on and is to find this soldier. And so he ends up giving him water because it's like, hey, here, water, you. like, don't shoot me. Here's some water. And so this guy drinks this water, and the Afghan man was like, oh, great, cool. Like, this guy can't speak English, and so they have to figure out some way of translating to one another. So Travante is to ask if he had seen a guy like him, if he had seen an American. And so the guy is to mention that he had seen like 7 bodies stacked up together. And so Travante is like, well, yeah, like that kind of covers the amount of people that had gone missing. So, yeah, like, can you take me to those men? And like the guy who's with Travante doesn't understand what he's talking about. So, but we just have both these characters go and sit by this fire, and so it seems that like Travante is to talk to him and kind of convince him for both of them to go into a certain location when like the sun is to rise. And Travante is having this guy kind of tell him or sing him this song of sorts, and Travante is like, "Hey man, I'm black. Like I'm not gonna be singing that music. I'm black." And so the guy's like, "Oh, like so." Neither one of them can understand one another, and so we kind of get the point where the Afghan man is to just kind of mention that, like, yeah, they can't understand one another, but, like, hey, it's great, like, that at least they're trying to talk to one another, even though they can't communicate or help one another understand what one another is talking about. So that kind of covers a bulk of what Travante is going through in this episode. So that kind of covers most of his journey. So let's cover Mitsuki. Let's just cover hers because I think really the other characters are to seemingly have a lot more going on in this one. I'm trying to see or think if there's anything else that there's other side characters covered here. Not really. All right, that's great because that just makes it easy. So we, yeah, let's cover Mitsuki. So Mitsuki is to, of course, hey, having a hangover, going and taking seemingly a shower somewhat, and is to just kind of put on some clothes and is to supposedly get ready for work. So Mitsuki goes into work to find out that they're doing a internal investigation, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And so they're kind of thumbing through people's stuff, and Mitsuki is just like, no, like you're not gonna go and take control of this you're not going to take control of this. So all of a sudden her superior is to tell Mitsuki to go home, and Mitsuki goes and grabs the badge of her superior, goes off to this secret room to find all the security footage to relay from the time that Hinata had died. And so they have to comb through every single video of every single thing that was to be done through this whole process to find that very last video. But it's not all in order, so they have to kind of comb through everything. So they comb through all of this stuff, and so Mitsuki is to just kind of thumb through everything and just kind of have these like last moments of her lover, of course. So we get the last video, and then all of a sudden there's to be this weird audio that Mitsuki is to pick up on, and so she realizes that the audio is saying weirdly Waja for some reason. And so Mitsuki is to repeat what that audio is to say. So we'll see what happens with that. That's all that really happens with Mitsuki for this episode. So now let's cover. I think I've kind of usually saved her for last. I think we'll save the UK kids. We'll save them for last. Like I think this time around, like it seems like they have a really interesting story going. So let's go with Anisha. So Anisha and Ahmed are to, of course, be going to this gas station to try and get gas and so on and so forth. And so they start going through this gas station, and so Nisha is to kind of look on the TV to just kind of see what's going on with this, with everything. And so it seems that we have some kind of racial stuff going on in here, which kind of makes me uncomfortable. Where like Ahmed is to go and park his car, and there's certain people that don't like that Ahmed is parking his car right there, and they're kind of giving they're kind of like calling Ahmed names and stuff like that, and trying to get him to move his car, but he won't. So they go and they start getting like stuff at this gas station, and then so Anisha goes and finds a person's car keys because she's too much paying more focus onto her kids than her keys. So Anisha swipes these keys and goes to grab this car and tell Ahmed, like, hey, get all your stuff and chuck it into this vehicle and let's get the heck out of here. And Ahmed is like, well, the car isn't perfectly charged yet. And Anisha's like, no, we're just going in this car. So they scramble and get the car and they drive off. And you know what? You know what I would actually like? I would actually enjoy if they did a whole story like kind of wrapped around the people that were to be main focusly involved here. Like if you had in the next episode focused on the people that had their car driven away by Anisha and what the heck they were going to do, I'd be like, oh my god, that would be great. Like that's the one thing that I liked about this like zombie show called, I think it was called Black Summer, that was on Netflix, where everything just kind of interlooped into one another, where I was like, oh my god, this freaking show is amazing. But the problem with the show also is you'd have to like consistently watch it. Like, because if you left for a while and you came back, you just like, oh man, like I have to rewatch this whole entire thing in one fell sitting, or otherwise, like I won't get the good parts of it being like a looped show where every single thing is to be connected with one another in one interesting kind of like approach to it. And that's the one thing that I liked about Black Summer is everything was like interconnected with one another, where all of a sudden you would just see like some guy getting beaten up in the tail end of one episode, and in the other episode you would see this guy. It's like, okay, why does this guy look so familiar? And then at the tail end of the episode you'd have this guy getting beaten up, and you'd be like, oh my god, so that's where we get this guy to have this journey to go and get beaten up at the end of this story. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so I wish everything was like interlooped with one another, or they would have stories that interlooped or interconnected or whatever. But anyways, so I took too long for that. I apologize. Plus, we don't have a lot of time to just diddly daddle or whatever. So Anisha and Ahmed and the family go off to some motel of sorts, or hotel, motel, whichever. It doesn't really matter. And so it seems like they're trying to use the landline of this motel to try and call people, because it doesn't seem like cell phones are working weirdly. And so we don't even know if anything is going to be working really. Like, who knows if this phone is actually working properly? Because Trevante was trying to call his people and was to tell them the situation, and that like his men are missing in action and so on and so forth, and like it doesn't seem like he was getting an answer. So Amanda and Anisha are kind of sleeping with their kids, and so Anisha is to go back to mention how really bad Ahmed was. Which I'm like, yeah, come back to that more. How like this Kai was to try and run off on his family, and how all it really mattered was him possibly getting back to his girlfriend, and that's probably still all that really matters to him, sadly enough. And so like I'm just waiting for like there to be this really horrific moment where like Ahmed is to kind of step in and do the right thing that he should do, and he doesn't. And he really just is like, no, like I'm not like I was gonna pull the ripcord on this family anyways, so like I'm waiting for one time where he's supposed to step in and do the right thing, and he goes off and like, ah, well, F that family, I'm gonna run off. Or wouldn't it be nice if Ahmed, who had been showcased as this kind of a-hole guy that only is to do things for selfish reasons, is to do a really nice gesture for this family, even if it causes his death. Like, it would be nice to see Ahmed, who seems like this kind of awful person to a lot of people, because simply of the whole affair thing, plus also the way that he's like treating his wife and family and whatever. Like, it would be kind of interesting to see Ahmed do something good for this family, but we'll see. So really, we like I think that's what really is to be a bulk of what actually comes from the Anisha story. I think there might have been a little bit blips here and there that were to have probably covered more of that stuff. Like we have phone calls where Anisha is calling her family, and we have blips of Ahmed calling his girlfriend, and so I think that's all that really ends up to be left to be happening to those characters. I could be wrong. Um, but there's always rebuttal for the next time I cover this. So it's bound to happen. Because I already didn't cover the Moana thing. So now let's cover the UK kids. I feel bad that I call them the UK kids, but that's the easiest thing to say. Should I just call them the road trip kids? The field trip kids? Would people feel better about that? Does it matter? So, probably to people from the United Kingdom. Like, I love the United Kingdom. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's just the easiest way to describe these kids. Because they're from the UK and they're doing kid stuff. So, pushing on. So, we find these kids going off from this canyon cliff thing, and so we assumed that they were going to fall to their death, right? If you assumed they were going to fall to your death, you're a horrible person. That was a joke. Please, don't do it. Don't say something horrible. And like, no, like, I naturally assumed that they were going to have a story with these people that was going to be past the last episode. Like, I naturally assumed that we were going to go further. Like, if they would have just killed all of the kids and whatever, I'm like, man, that would have been that was a waste. But I'm still wondering, okay, but then, like, I'm scratching my head and just, like, we're now 3 episodes in and they didn't go back to the Sam Neill thing? Is Sam Neill and the sheriff, is the sheriff just dead? What's going on with that story? Are they going to ever come back to that story? I'm confused. What the like, it's now 3 episodes and we have no sliver of time to cover that sheriff story? Whatever the heck happened to him? Any takers? I know it's probably like, well, yeah, the very next episode they cover that, or what? I'm sure there might be just something where it's like, oh yeah, it gets covered, or no, and they never come back to it. Either way, I'm perfectly fine to just be completely oblivious of what all happens. But anyways, so the UK kids. So I'm gonna just keep calling them that. So the kids that are in this thing, this place that they're too lazy to mountain climb their way out of this. Freaking lazy. Like, the education of today, none of these kids can just figure out how to do this thing called climb. Come on. Like, do like a couple of push-ups and then maybe you can go and climb up this rock. Come on, kids. Freaking, there's a adult's life and on the lines, you know? Because we find out that Mr. E, or Mr. Edward, is gonna freaking die. Like, this guy is, like, bleeding out of everywhere. Like, this guy has, like, a metal thing through his arm. Like, his face had a piece of glass coming out of it. And then, like, the guy's face is bleeding. And so the kid's just like, oh, just put a tissue on it. That should just, yeah, like, I'm sure he'll be fine if you just put a tissue on it and put pressure on the cut. And then, like, the kid ends up getting, like, shoved out of the bus. And they're like, hey, like, who made you, like, doctor or whatever? It's like, no, we really have to help this guy. And so the kids' biggest plan is that they decide that they're just going to make a fire and that is going to possibly help them get rescued because someone's going to see the fire at some point. I'm like, dude, Mr. E is going to freaking die. Like, this guy is, like, by the tail end of here, like, Mr. E is having, like, a fever going on, and he's not having a fever for, like, a cowbell or, like, he's having a hankering for something. No, like, this guy is getting this thing called sick. Because probably a lot of blood loss being happened with this gentleman. Plus, who knows what other kind of injuries this guy is to hold upon him. So, yeah, this guy is probably going to be wigging out sometime soon because he's probably going to have some kind of fever of sorts. So that's great. So this guy's probably going to die, and these kids are going to get just stuck down here. We still never understood what the heck was going on with Casper, the friendly ghost, because we have to actually reference that in this episode, because I would. So we had Casper, who had this like seizure or whatever the heck was going on him with him, and so they blame Casper for this accident. Weirdly, like as if he was having like Carrie like power, and he was like, "I'm just gonna have this bus go into this canyon thingy." Whatever this is actually to be called, because I can't figure it out. Like, Casper was using his unfriendly powers, because to just, yeah, we're gonna get trapped in here. That's what he was doing while having a seizure, which, like, hopefully this kid doesn't have another seizure, or some other bus is gonna go down this hill and probably explode and die. Why is it that this bus didn't explode and or whichever? Like, did they just use like the last ditch portion of gas upon this bus? Was the bus electrical? And so didn't explode? But yeah, so these kids are just kind of like hanging out in this bus that could maybe explode at any second. That's my thought process of just wanting these kids to be safe, but that's just me, right? It's just me. Just worried about the safety of youngins. The youngs, you know? The smallers, you know what I mean? So Casper is to again be the most friendly to the unfriendly, and some unsavory cats in this episode coming over to just make unfriendly notions with Casper. So Casper is to go on with Jamelia, which I still don't even know how to pronounce this girl's name, and I'm still just dead set on just wanting to call her Yellow Headphones Girl, because no offense, I'm probably tempted to just call her also Huston, because that's her last name. So Casper and Hudson are just kind of starting this fire. They're trying to find paper and just to start this fire. So we have this one kid, Gary? Montgomery? Like Montgomery Scott? Like from Star Trek? So, yeah, so this guy is Montgomery. Phil! Or Monty? Cuttermill? Man, these names, I tell you. So, Monty seems to separate himself from everyone else. And so Monty is going and separately talking to Casper, with everyone else just off doing whatever they're doing. And so now we have like this weird heart to heart between these two characters, weirdly, because it feels like they've earned this whole situation, where it seems that maybe Monty had been bullying Casper for whatever reason. So, and he like kind of told him like, "Hey, you caused all this." It wasn't even true. So Monty was like, you know what, I'm sorry about what I said back there. It wasn't true. Uh, like, if anything, I've just had some dad troubles and so on and so forth. And so Casper's like, same, man, same. Because, Monty is to mention, well, yeah, uh, you had a mom that I guess was handicapped. Did they call her anything? Did they have any nicknames for her? And so, come to find out, Casper is to tell this guy that the reason why his father had left was because he had chucked his wife down a flight of stairs, and that's the reason why he supposedly had left. And so Monty used to say, it's like, well, yeah, my dad decided that he wanted to leave one day because he said that he wanted to reset, that he wanted to all of a sudden, his life wanted to become like a game of Fortnite where he just wanted to reset the whole thing, and he left. And so when Monty is to hear this story about Casper, in his father's story, Monty is to all of a sudden tell Casper, it's like, good that you told me that story, because I'm going to use it against you for a rainy day. Because what I said, lie, but what you said, I'm going to use against you. So, all of a sudden, we now have a point where Monty is to, they have to ration their chips. They call them crisps, but chips. So, they have drinks and they have chips, and I'm like, how is it that all these people, they probably have, tons and tons of food, weirdly, for whatever reason. And so now, Monty is to, kind of tell him, it's like, well, hey, I think we should kind of figure out how to use this food to the best of our abilities. And I'm just waiting for, one person to eat all the food, because that's normally what happens in every single one of these scenarios, where it's like somebody eats either all of the food, and then a bunch of people are all to starve, or somebody runs off with the food and is to supposedly just justify it by oh yeah, I ran off to go and get help, and I took all the food, and because I was I obviously should go and get all the food so we can go and find people. There's those kinds of people. So we have Monty, who is to just kind of have everyone vote for who is going to be the leader of this whole thing, because they're like, well, who died and made you king, or who made you prime minister? And so they're just like, well, let's have a vote. So Monty is realizing that there's an odd, or there's not a good, there's an even number of votes against, for and against. So all of a sudden, Monty is just like, hey, Casper, seems like it's a rainy day coming. or some goofy thing like that. Or, oh, the rain has stopped. Maybe I should just go and spill the beans, Casper. So Casper's to go and raise his hand, and so Monty's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm the leader then. Oh, kind of blackmailing Casper. So, you know what? You know what, if I were Casper, I'm like, man, you better not sleep. Monty, you better not sleep. You better keep one eye open. Because you know what? Somebody could have another accident. Because we've already had certain people that could possibly have died from this bus accident. So, man, it would be a shame if anybody else just died from this. Yeah, you're a kid, but still, people could die. we can have some Lord of the Flies like situation here. Some people could just die because eventually, what's going to happen when the food's going to run out? Somebody's going to be looking mighty tasty at some point, you know. So yeah, uh, so really we have like we have Monty who ends up going and eating some chips, and I'm just like, how is this guy going to use this to the best of his advantage? And I'm just waiting for like people to just play off one another. But I think with that said, I think that's all that we get clips from all of this stuff. Like, not very productive episode in all honesty. Just a lot of like transitions or a lot of us like going like, oh, okay, like so now like we figured out where like this character is going or transitioning to, and that's a lot of this episode is just transitional things. So with that said, I think I'm gonna get out of here. Um, Everyone, thank you for watching these episodes. Thank you for watching these reviews. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to continue to try to do these as best as I can, and we'll see where these reviews all head. But with that said, I apologize. Like, I tried to a lot, just kind of skirt around, like, having to forcibly need to learn new names for certain characters. I'm just like, I'm just going to keep calling this person that and not have to learn a name or two. But we'll see how this all plays out, or there might be some introductions of other characters that I am all of a sudden going to have to know who they are for whatever reason. And so, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.